Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's husband and the Duke of Edinburgh, died Friday at age 99, Buckingham Palace announced. He was the first male royal consort since Queen Victoria's time in the 1800s, and the longest-serving consort in British history. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the royal family's official website said. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family joined with people around the world in mourning his loss. Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark was a dashing young officer when he courted then Princess Elizabeth after World War II, when he had served with the Royal Navy's Mediterranean and Pacific fleets. To have been spared in the war and seen victory, to have been given the chance to rest and to readjust myself, to have fallen in love completely and unreservedly, makes all one's personal and even the world's troubles seem small and petty, he wrote Elizabeth in 1946. By the time of their wedding in 1947, he had renounced his royal titles and naval career, taken British citizenship and agreed that his children would carry his wife's family name of Windsor. These were significant sacrifices, says Karine Orbach of the University of London's Institute of Historical Research. He must have regretted it a lot, she says. It's a very privileged life, of course, but it's also a very boring life. It also meant that a man like him, who is an alpha man, who wants to lead, who wants to be recognized in his own profession, couldn't fulfill that. Later in life, Philip took to describing himself as the world's most experienced plaque unveiler. Philip was born in Corfu, Greece, into a deeply dysfunctional branch of the Greek royal family. His father was notorious as a philanderer and gambler. His mother, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to a mental hospital, became deeply religious. Young Philip grew up couch surfing between royal relatives across Europe. I had vaguely thought, what could I do? He told the BBC in 1995. Bit difficult being stateless. In the early years, Philip was considered a rebel and a modernizer. He bristled at stuffy courtiers and allowed cameras behind the scenes at Buckingham Palace. But by the 1970s, Philip was widely seen as a crotchety, angular figure trailing his wife at royal walkabouts, emitting intermittent and much reported gaffes. He called Beijing a ghastly city while on a visit there. He once asked a female Navy cadet if she worked in a strip club. And he congratulated a British backpacker in Papua New Guinea for not being eaten. Matthew Glencross, a historian at King's College London, says these statements may have been intentional. The man was no idiot, he says. The man knew when he was saying certain things. And I think he almost deliberately did it. He kind of enjoyed it, because it provided the light side of a royal tour. If it bothered Queen Elizabeth, she never let on. Philip was her closest companion and confidant and one of the last links to her life before the throne. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments. But he has, quite simply, been my strength. And stay all these years, she said 50 years after their wedding. The couple had 4 children, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward. Historians say Philip, a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria, was always aware that, as royal consort, he had no constitutional role in British politics or public life. He was careful not to cross that line. But he devoted many hours to supporting British institutions. And was a passionate advocate for the environment, a passion shared by his son Charles. The Duke of Edinburgh's award, which he founded in 1956, honors achievements of young people around the world. Philip announced his retirement from public duties in 2017. Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark was born in Mon Repos on the Greek island of Corfu on June 10, 1921, the only son and 5th and final child of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg. A member of the House of Glucksburg, the ruling house of Denmark, he was a prince of both Greece and Denmark by virtue of his patrilineal descent from George I of Greece and Christian IX of Denmark, and he was from birth in the line of succession to both thrones. Philip's 4 elder sisters were Margarita, Theodora, Cecily, and Sophie. He was baptized in the Greek Orthodox rite at St. George's Church in the Old Fortress in Corfu. Shortly after Philip's birth, his maternal grandfather Prince Louis of Battenberg, then known as Louis Mountbatten, Marquess of Milford Haven, died in London. Louis was a naturalised British subject who, after a career in the Royal Navy, had renounced his German titles and adopted the surname Mountbatten, an anglicised version of Battenberg, during the First World War, owing to anti-German sentiment in Britain. After visiting London for his grandfather's memorial service, Philip and his mother returned to Greece, where Prince Andrew had remained to command a Greek army division embroiled in the Greco-Turkish War. The war went badly for Greece, and the Turks made large gains. Philip's uncle and high commander of the Greek expeditionary force, King Constantine I, was blamed for the defeat and was forced to abdicate on September 27, 1922. The new military government arrested Prince Andrew, along with others. The commanding officer of the army, General Georgios Hatzianestis, and 5 senior politicians, were arrested, tried, and executed in the trial of the six. Prince Andrew's life was also believed to be in danger and Princess Alice was under surveillance. Finally, in December, a revolutionary court banished Prince Andrew from Greece, for life. The British naval vessel HMS Calypso evacuated Prince Andrew's family, with Philip carried to safety in a cot made from a fruit box. Philip's family went to France, where they settled in the Paris suburb of St. Cloud in a house lent to them by his wealthy aunt, Princess George of Greece and Denmark. Because Philip left Greece as a baby, he did not speak Greek. In 1992, he said that he could understand a certain amount. Philip stated that he thought of himself as Danish, and his family spoke English, French, and German. Philip, who in his youth was known for his charm, was linked to a number of women, including Osla Benning. Philip was first educated at the Elms, an American school in Paris run by Donald Majanet, who described Philip as a know-it-all smarty person, but always remarkably polite. In 1928, he was sent to the United Kingdom to attend Cheam School, living with his maternal grandmother, Victoria Mountbatten, Dowager Marchioness of Milford Haven, at Kensington Palace, and his uncle, George Mountbatten, 2nd Marquess of Milford Haven, at Linden Manor in Bray, Berkshire. In the next 3 years, his 4 sisters married German princes and moved to Germany. His mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia and placed in an asylum. And his father took up residence in Monte Carlo. Philip had little contact with his mother for the remainder of his childhood. In 1933, he was sent to Schulisch Schloss Salem in Germany, which had the advantage of saving school fees. Because it was owned by the family of his brother-in-law, Berthold, Margrave of Baden. With the rise of Nazism in Germany, Salem's Jewish founder, Kurt Hahn, fled persecution and founded Gordonstone School in Scotland, to which Philip moved after 2 terms at Salem. In 1937, his sister Cecily, her husband Georg Donatus, hereditary Grand Duke of Hesse, her 2 young sons, Ludwig and Alexander, her newborn infant, and her mother-in-law, Princess Eleanor of Solms-Hohenzollern-Lich, were killed in an air crash at Ostend. Philip, then 16 years old, attended the funeral in Darmstadt. The following year, his uncle and guardian Lord Milford Haven died of bone marrow cancer. After leaving Gordonstone in early 1939, Philip completed a term as a cadet at the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, then repatriated to Greece, living with his mother in Athens for a month in mid-1939. At the behest of the Greek king, George II, he returned to Britain in September to resume training for the Royal Navy. He graduated from Dartmouth the next year as the best cadet in his course. During the Second World War, he continued to serve in the British forces, while 2 of his brothers-in-law, Prince Christoph of Hesse and Berthold, Margrave of Baden, fought on the opposing German side. Philip was appointed as a midshipman in January 1940. He spent 4 months on the battleship HMS Ramillies, protecting convoys of the Australian Expeditionary Force in the Indian Ocean, followed by shorter postings on HMS Kent, on HMS Shropshire, and in Ceylon. After the invasion of Greece by Italy in October 1940, he was transferred from the Indian Ocean to the battleship HMS Valiant in the Mediterranean Fleet. On February 1, 1941, Philip was commissioned as a sub-lieutenant after a series of courses at Portsmouth, in which he gained the top grade in 4 out of 5 sections of the qualifying examination. Among other engagements, he was involved in the Battle of Crete, and was mentioned in dispatches for his service during the Battle of Cape Matapan, in which he controlled the battleship's searchlights. He was also awarded the Greek War Cross. In June 1942, he was appointed to the V&W class destroyer and flotilla leader HMS Wallace, which was involved in convoy escort tasks on the east coast of Britain, as well as the Allied invasion of Sicily. Promotion to lieutenant followed on July 16, 1942. In October of the same year, he became first lieutenant of HMS Wallace, at 21 years old, one of the youngest first lieutenants in the Royal Navy. During the invasion of Sicily, in July 1943, as second in command of Wallace, he saved his ship from a night bomber attack. He devised a plan to launch a raft with smoke floats that successfully distracted the bombers, allowing the ship to slip away unnoticed. In 1944, he moved on to the new destroyer, HMS Whelp, where he saw service with the British Pacific Fleet in the 27th Destroyer Flotilla. He was present in Tokyo Bay when the instrument of Japanese surrender was signed. Philip returned to the United Kingdom on the Whelp in January 1946, and was posted as an instructor at HMS Royal Arthur, the Petty Officers' School in Corsham, Wiltshire. In 1939, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth toured the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth. During the visit, the Queen and Louis Mountbatten asked his nephew Philip to escort the King's two daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, who were Philip's third cousins through Queen Victoria, and second cousins once removed through King Christian IX of Denmark. Elizabeth fell in love with Philip, and they began to exchange letters when she was 13. Eventually, in the summer of 1946, Philip asked the King for his daughter's hand in marriage. The King granted his request, provided that any formal engagement be delayed until Elizabeth's 21st birthday the following April. By March 1947, Philip had abandoned his Greek and Danish royal titles, had adopted the surname Mountbatten from his mother's family, and had become a naturalised British subject. The engagement was announced to the public on July 10, 1947. Though Philip appeared always to have regarded himself as an Anglican, and he had attended Anglican services with his classmates and relations in England and throughout his Royal Navy days, he had been baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, wanted to regularise Philip's position by officially receiving him into the Church of England, which he did in October 1947. The day before the wedding, King George VI bestowed the style of Royal Highness on Philip, and, on the morning of the wedding, November 20, 1947, he was made the Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Merioneth, and Baron Greenwich of Greenwich in the County of London. Consequently, being already a Knight of the Garter, between 19 and November 20, 1947. He bore the unusual style His Royal Highness Sir Philip Mountbatten, and is so described in the letters patent of November 20, 1947. Philip and Elizabeth were married in a ceremony at Westminster Abbey, recorded and broadcast by BBC Radio to 200 million people around the world. In post-war Britain, it was not acceptable for any of the Duke of Edinburgh's German relations to be invited to the wedding, including Philip's three surviving sisters, all of whom had married German princes. After their marriage, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh took up residence at Clarence House. Their first two children were born before Elizabeth succeeded her father as monarch in 1952. Prince Charles in 1948 and Princess Anne in 1950. Their marriage is now the longest of any British monarch. Philip was introduced to the House of Lords on July 21, 1948, immediately before his uncle Louis Mountbatten, who had been made Earl Mountbatten of Burma. Philip, like his sons Charles and Andrew and other royals, ceased to be members of the House of Lords following the House of Lords Act 1999. He never spoke in the House. After his honeymoon at the Mountbatten family home, Broadlands, Philip returned to the Navy, at first in a desk job at the Admiralty, and later on a staff course at the Naval Staff College, Greenwich. From 1949, he was stationed in Malta after being posted as the first lieutenant of the destroyer HMS Chequers, the lead ship of the first destroyer flotilla in the Mediterranean Fleet. On July 16, 1950, he was promoted to lieutenant commander and given command of the frigate HMS Magpie. On June 30, 1952, Philip was promoted to commander, though his active naval career had ended in July 1951. With the King in ill health, Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh were both appointed to the Privy Council. On November 4, 1951, after a coast-to-coast tour of Canada. At the end of January 1952, Philip and his wife set out on a tour of the Commonwealth. On February 6, 1952, they were in Kenya when Elizabeth's father died. And she became queen. It was Philip who broke the news to Elizabeth at Sagana Lodge, and the royal party immediately returned to the United Kingdom. The accession of Elizabeth to the throne brought up the question of the name of the royal house, as Elizabeth would typically have taken Philip's last name upon marriage. The Duke's uncle, Earl Mountbatten of Burma, advocated the name House of Mountbatten. Philip suggested House of Edinburgh, after his ducal title. When Queen Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother, heard of this, she informed the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who himself later advised the Queen to issue a royal proclamation declaring that the royal house was to remain known as the House of Windsor. Prince Philip privately complained, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba. I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children." On February 8, 1960, several years after the death of Queen Mary and the resignation of Churchill as Prime Minister, the Queen issued an order in council declaring that Mountbatten Windsor would be the surname of her and her husband's male line descendants who are not styled as Royal Highness or titled as Prince or Princess. While it seems the Queen had absolutely set her heart on such a change and had it in mind for some time, it occurred only 11 days before the birth of Prince Andrew, 19th of February, and only after 3 months of protracted correspondence between constitutional expert Edward Ewey, who averred that, Without such a change, the royal child would be born with the badge of bastardy, and Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, who had attempted to rebut Iwi's arguments. After her accession to the throne, the Queen also announced that the Duke was to have place, preeminence and precedence next to her on all occasions and in all meetings, except where otherwise provided by Act of Parliament. This meant the Duke took precedence over his son, the Prince of Wales, except, officially, in the British Parliament. In fact, however, he attended Parliament only when escorting the Queen for the annual state opening of Parliament, where he walked and sat beside her. Contrary to rumours over the years, the Queen and Duke were said by insiders to have had a strong relationship throughout their marriage, despite the challenges of Elizabeth's reign. The Queen referred to Prince Philip in a speech on the occasion of her Diamond Jubilee in 2012 as her constant strength and guide. Prince Philip received a parliamentary annuity of £359,000 since 1990. That serves to meet official expenses in carrying out public duties. The annuity was unaffected by the reform of royal finances under the Sovereign Grant Act 2011. Any part of the allowance that was not used to meet official expenditure was liable for tax. In practice, the entire allowance was used to fund his official duties. As consort to the Queen, Philip supported his wife in her new duties as sovereign, accompanying her to ceremonies such as the state opening of Parliament in various countries, state dinners, and tours abroad. As chairman of the Coronation Commission, he was the first member of the royal family to fly in a helicopter, visiting the troops that were to take part in the ceremony. Philip was not crowned in the service, but knelt before Elizabeth, with her hands enclosing his, and swore to be her liege man of life and limb. In the early 1950s, his sister-in-law, Princess Margaret, considered marrying a divorced older man, Peter Townsend. The press accused Philip of being hostile to the match, to which he replied, "I haven't done anything." Philip had not interfered, preferring to stay out of other people's love lives. Eventually, Margaret and Townsend parted. For 6 months, over 1953-54, Philip and Elizabeth toured the Commonwealth. As with previous tours, the children were left in Britain. In 1956, the Duke, with Kurt Hahn, founded the Duke of Edinburgh's Award in order to give young people a sense of responsibility to themselves and their communities. In the same year, he also established the Commonwealth Study Conferences. From 1956 to 1957, Philip traveled around the world aboard the newly commissioned HMY Britannia, during which he opened the 1956 Summer Olympics in Melbourne and visited the Antarctic, becoming the first royal to cross the Antarctic Circle. The Queen and the children remained in the UK. On the return leg of the journey, Philip's private secretary, Mike Parker, was sued for divorce by his wife. As with Townsend, the press still portrayed divorce as a scandal, and eventually Parker resigned. He later said that the Duke was very supportive and the Queen was wonderful throughout. She regarded divorce as a sadness, not a hanging offense. In a public show of support, the Queen created Parker a Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. Further press reports claimed that the Queen and the Duke were drifting apart, which enraged the Duke and dismayed the Queen, who issued a strongly worded denial. On February 22, 1957, she granted her husband the style and title of a Prince of the United Kingdom by letters patent, and it was gazetted that he was to be known as His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Philip was appointed to the Queen's Privy Council for Canada on October 14, 1957, taking his oath of allegiance before the Queen in person at her Canadian residence, Rideau Hall. Remarks he made 2 years later to the Canadian Medical Association on the subject of youth and sport were taken as a suggestion the Canadian children were out of shape. This was at first considered tactless, but Philip was later admired for his encouragement of physical fitness. In Canada in 1969, Philip spoke about his views on republicanism. "It is a complete misconception to imagine that the monarchy exists in the interests of the monarch. It doesn't. It exists in the interests of the people. If at any time any nation decides that the system is unacceptable, then it is up to them to change it." Philip was patron of some 800 organizations, particularly focused on the environment, industry, sport, and education. His first solo engagement as Duke of Edinburgh was in March 1948, presenting prizes at the boxing finals of the London Federation of Boys' Clubs at the Royal Albert Hall. He was president of the National Playing Fields Association. For 64 years, from 1947 until his grandson Prince William took over the role in 2013. He served as UK President of the World Wildlife Fund from 1961 to 1982, International President from 1981, and President Emeritus from 1996. In 1952, he became patron of the Industrial Society, since renamed the Work Foundation. Between 1959 and 1965, Prince Philip was the president of BAFTA. He was president of the International Equestrian Federation from 1964 to 1986, and served as Chancellor of the Universities of Cambridge, Edinburgh, Salford, and Wales. 81. In 2017, the British Heart Foundation thanked Prince Philip for being its patron for 55 years, during which time, in addition to organizing fundraisers, he supported the creation of 9 BHF-funded Centres of Excellence. He was an honorary Fellow of St Edmund's College, Cambridge. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, husband of Queen Elizabeth II and patriarch of a turbulent royal family that he sought to ensure would not be Britain's last, died on Friday at Windsor Castle in England. He was 99. His death was announced by Buckingham Palace, which said he had died peacefully. No cause of death was immediately given. Philip had been hospitalized several times in recent years for various ailments, most recently in February, the palace said. He died just as Buckingham Palace was again in turmoil, this time over Oprah Winfrey's explosive televised interview with Philip's grandson Prince Harry and Harry's biracial wife, Meghan, on March 7. The couple, in self-imposed exile in California, lodged accusations of racism and cruelty against members of the royal family. As the first gentleman in the land, Philip tried to shepherd into the 20th century a monarchy encrusted with the trappings of the 19th. But his pageantry was upstaged by scandal and his regal weddings were followed by sensational divorces. His mission, as he saw it, changed. Now it was to help preserve the crown itself. Yet preservation, of Britain, of the throne, of centuries of tradition, had always been the mission. When this tall, handsome prince married the young crown princess, Elizabeth, he at 26, she at 21, on November 20, 1947, a battered Britain was still recovering from World War II. The sun had all but set on its empire, and the abdication of Edward VIII over his love for Wallis Simpson, a divorced American, was still reverberating a decade later. The wedding held out the promise that the monarchy, like the nation, would survive, and it offered that reassurance in almost fairytale fashion, complete with magnificent horse-drawn coaches resplendent in gold and a throng of adoring subjects lining the route between Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey. More, it was a heartfelt match. Elizabeth told her father, King George VI, that Philip was the only man she could ever love. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain led tributes to Prince Philip on Friday, praising his lifelong support for Queen Elizabeth II and adding that he had earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth and around the world. He was the longest-serving consort in history and one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War, Mr. Johnson said in a statement read in somber tones. Referring to the prince's hobby of driving horse-drawn carriages, Mr. Johnson added that like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life. The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, echoed those sentiments, saying that Britain had lost an extraordinary public servant. Prince Philip dedicated his life to our country, from a distinguished career in the Royal Navy during the Second World War to his decades of service as the Duke of Edinburgh, Mr. Starmer added in a statement. However, he will be remembered most of all for his extraordinary commitment and devotion to the Queen. Scotland's leader, Nicola Sturgeon, said that she was saddened by the news of Philip's death and that she was sending her deepest condolences to the royal family. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, said that he was grateful for the contributions Philip had made to the city, including his charity work, and that his legacy would positively affect the city for many years to come. Lindsay Hoyle, the House of Commons Speaker, also paid tribute, saying, "His was a long life that saw so much dedication to duty." Across the Commonwealth, heads of state also offered their condolences. Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia said in a statement that the Prince had embodied a generation that we will never see again. Similar condolences were offered by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India and Prime Jacinda Ardern of New